Right, hello everybody. Round number 3, third short video about Boris Spassky. And today we are going to look at a game that was played in 1998 between Boris Spassky and Ruslan Ponomarev, who was only a few years later the world chess champion. For those who didn't know, there was a breakup in chess, with some people opting to go various routes with their affiliates and their organizations, and Ruslan Ponomarev was a world champion in the early 2000s. So in other words, this is just before that, in 1998, where he jumps and bumps Boris Spassky that's over 60 years old already, with lots of experience. So it's not just about Boris Spassky that we're doing this video today. Tremendous how experience can help you win a game. Remember, it's not any old opponent. The guy playing the black pieces soon was a world champion. In other words, he beat most of players, and today, if we're facing a 60-odd-year-old, we do expect to win that game. But just through chess knowledge, as you carry on with your career, you find it harder to study your openings, harder to remember them, but in the middle game you can find your way. So experience triumphs over youth and a very well prepared opponent. So we'll see here how, first of all, Boris Spassky gets a playable game by steering the things into a position where he knows what's going on. And to me, the catch in this game, the interesting thing, is how a knight is used to cut out a very strong bishop. It's something not often seen. You know, we use the knight often on an outpost to stop rooks and things from getting into our territory. Here, the knight actually stops a bishop. And the knight, you'll see, does not have the support of a pawn. So an odd idea, but very, very strong. And something to remember, because we sometimes do get these positions. The position was reached after it started off as a perk defense. And in the perk defense, after knight c3, g6, this is the perk defense, or pirch, some people say. I'll have to ask Hans Stein, a very knowledgeable guy about chess openings, what the correct pronunciation is, but I think most of us say perk. And after g6, Boris Spassky, playing white, opted for f4. Okay? And I think something to remember here, often today, with online chess and the gap between youngsters and the elder guys perhaps growing because we don't interact like we used to. In the old days, when you played at the club, there were more senior chess players than what there were young ones, and there was a respect for an older chess player, and we can learn from them. So if we look what Spassky does here, he chooses a very aggressive opening. And especially for a youngster, what are you telling him? Right, let's see what you got. I'm coming to attack you. And after f4, very interesting what Ponomarev does after this. Okay, he plays bishop g7, after which we have knight f3. And we have bishop d3. So white is building a strong center. And what is going on? My move does not want to make a move. Okay. Right. It's my fault. Knight f3. I haven't seen that I haven't castled. I'm looking on two screens, and my specs are right there close to the PE Chess Club in Port Elizabeth. I forgot them there in the lockdown. I was talking about getting older. I don't see all that well anymore, but hopefully I can still remember some chess moves and some stories. After bishop d3, black plays a very interesting move. Okay, knight a6, offering white to take that knight. Now we know that bishops are better than knights, and if we take that knight, we're probably going to lose control of the white squares from white's side. We're going to open the b file for black's rook, and his bishop's going to come out. So I don't think Ponomarev expected Spassky to capture. But very interesting, he does capture. So now black has double pawns, and we'll see now how to play here from white. Because at first glance, I don't think any of us can think that white's position will turn up much better, but it does. Right. So after the capture, first things first, white castles, and black now has to make another move. Straight away takes the half open file. Half open because there are only pawns on one side of the board, on white's side. If it's completely open with no pawns, it's an open file. If there's pawns on one side, it's a semi-open file. And black has the better of that file. All right, so queen e2, okay, developing a piece to attack the center, and we almost have our rooks connected for later on. So e6, black keeping it together, and now king h1. Often a move seen to get off this diagonal, first of all, and as well we have to do is perhaps push the g pawn later on. We can have a rook on g1. So not always necessary, but if somebody does play it against you, either side, black can also play king h8, then the colors of the important diagonals are just reversed. He's going to attack you most likely, gets his king into a safe corner and then launch. So after king h1, we have a natural move by black, which is rook e8, placing the rook in line with the white queen. So if pawns are being exchanged, black will have a nice open file and win tempos on the white queen. So of course, with the rook wasting that move, according to Spassky's next move, he blocks the file. Now the rook looks a bit silly on e8. Okay, but Ponomarev doesn't think so. He goes and attacks that e5 pawn. If he can get rid of it or swap it off, maybe later he can play his other pawn from e6 to e5 and the rook will join the game. Or if there's another exchange, the rook might join the game on the f or the d file again if those pawns disappear. So after knight d7, very interesting position arises. Okay, the knight was on f6, attacking and defending the center. So the next move, white goes knight e4. And one thing about Boris Spassky, I've played games of many well-known chess players. If there's somebody that understands the center and when to have pawns there and when to have pieces there, it's second to none. It's really well documented, and it's fantastic to watch Spassky use the center. That knight, I'm sure we would have all placed it there, but would we have done what he did later on in the game? Now comes d5. Makes sense by black. He chases the knight away, and the knight comes to f2. The knight doesn't seem too well placed there, but we'll see why he placed it there. After c5, black attacks the center again, and a well-known idea now, we send up our pawn chain to keep our center under control. We can't let our pawns be demolished in the center. Black's e6 and d5 pawn will come alive, right? If these two pawns disappear for some reason, if we exchange them in a silly way, we are going to pay the price. And the worst thing is, of course, this bishop would get into the game, which doesn't really do so in this game, even though you might think it does. That was the whole motive of the game. So pawn takes pawn, and pawn takes pawn. Queen b6 by black, and the knight from f2, bang, on to d3. No black pawn will ever chase that knight. The knight is like an octopus, attacking, defending, defending, and maybe a bit of both. So, like an octopus, 8 tentacles, and the knight is standing very strong. And the remarkable thing, it's standing on a white square. Let's see what happens later on. Right, so after knight d3, a5 happens, bishop d2, white completes his development, and now a move I think we've all been waiting for, bishop a6 by Ruslan Ponomarev. And very difficult to assess this game without an engine, right? But remember, in those days there were no engines, or they were very new. Before this game was played, of course, very seldom did you hear about the engine. You were on your own, and I think sometimes better for chess that you had to use your own brain and analyze what to do next. Okay, So bishop c3, defending b pawn, defending d pawn, and blocking off the open c file. So the bishop doesn't stand perfect, but it does do quite a bit from c3, and nothing less than this bishop on g7, who's hemmed in by the white pawns. And there's no ways that black can actually break these pawns up at the moment. So bishop c3 makes sense, right? a4 by white, right? Queen d2, maybe eyeing the a5 and the b4 square with the bishop later. Let's see what happens. Black plays rook on e to c8, trying to use the c file, and now this move looks better and better, blocking off that rook. Now tremendous. Black was trying to break through white's queen side with 5 pieces, aiming at the queen side and standing in the black on the in the black queen side. So straight away we have g4. If we look at the pawn structure, even though the game started as a perk, this looks pretty much like the French, and it's well known, I'm sure you all know it, that who controls f5 in these sort of positions is in the driving seat. After g4, a move that's moving a pawn in front of the king, but we've taken our precautions. The king's in the corner, the pawn's up to g4. The next place we have to look, is the center under control? If the center's under control, you can move a pawn on the side of the board and try and go and make a breakthrough. If the center is open, or it can be opened, it's sometimes dangerous to push a pawn on the side of the board where your king is, because your opponent will crack the center open and then come through the center and get to your king. So, a couple of things. King safe, center under control, therefore g4 makes sense, and attacking the f5 square. So, what happens next? After g4, black doesn't want that. He plays f5, blocking any ideas of white placing a pawn on f5. So interesting now, before opening the file, white places his rook, and maybe there's an open file soon when this pawn disappears to capture over here. So first prepare, take the open file, and then maybe you can take on f5. So black decides to take white's pawn, and rook takes g4. Okay, so queen b5, a diagonal. This is what I was talking about before the game actually started. This diagonal is very important. White does have no longer a white squared bishop. He doesn't have it anymore, and maybe black can use the battery with his bishop and his queen to cause damage in white's position. But here's that knight, the 4-post with a knight stopping that black bishop on the white square. Is very, very tough for black to do anything in this position. And all of a sudden, black has double pawns, so he has to try and do something with an attack of some sort to try and stay in the game. So what would white play in this position? He plays knight e1. Interesting move. Another defender on the d3 knight. But still, we would think that black is okay. Black swings his rook to f8. And now white has to make a move. Right? Sometimes knights like this can look very attractive. They don't always work, because if you move one of the knights, the other knight is no longer protected, and it boils down to the knights don't attack the same squares anymore. On the other hand, it's quite logical to think if they just stand here the whole game and do nothing, black might wiggle out and come and attack you or push a pawn through. You have to do something. So what does white do? Bishop to b4. Note how this knight even defends the bishop on b4 together with the queen, so there's no capture. Queen takes and rook takes will fail. Attacking the rook on f8, which plays to f7. Now, even though black loses the game in the end, this is a slightly advanced principle in chess. So even though the rook was chased away, sometimes it's not bad. It's called 7th rank protection. The rook covers the 7th rank, which means it's not so easy for white to go and put a rook or a queen on the 7th rank. So at this point, I don't think black was too unhappy to move his rook to f7. And after that, one thing from here, the rooks were still connected. So very cleverly, after the rook goes to f7, Spassky is the one that seizes the c-file. And black can easily miss this, even at that level, because white's rooks are not connected. You might think, well, the rooks aren't that important or can't cause me that much trouble because they're not connected. But all of a sudden, white's rook arrives on the open c-file, and it's black's rooks that are not connected. Be very careful. One often gets checkmated on the back rank or similar things. When you are leading, you might be a rook up and you think, well, I've got two, he's got one, or she's got one. All of a sudden, that rook comes and bang, and you've lost. All right, so what happens next? An interesting position. Queen b6 to stop the rook from penetrating. And now we have a diamond gold dust outpost. Bishop d6. Tremendous move by the bishop. The rook has to move and plays back to e8. Okay. Knight to f3. Black now hoping for a draw. Queen b5. If the knight comes back, we will have possibly a repetition. But now white's pieces are better organized. So a rook lift. Not only, not only to defend the knight, but also in front of the pawns, and might be able to take a few a few ranks and a few files from there. After rook c3, black plays knight b6, owning on the c4 square, which looks quite annoying and a good square for black. But remember, against top players, you will never control all 64 squares. One of the biggest tricks is to know which squares to give and which to take. And that is, in my opinion, where the top players are removed from the rest. Okay, we can all see that c4 is a good square for black, but how good is it? And what does white have in return? So we'll see what happens. Okay, b3, stopping that knight from coming in, and 8 takes b3. And after 8 takes b, the knight or the queen or the bishop can't come into c4 or a4. So what do we see? Rook f5, I think quite a good square for the rook. Remember, white does no longer have a white squared bishop. So a knight, a rook, or a bishop on that square, f5, remember what we said earlier, could be good for black. And if it was only for that, if it could stay there, black would be good. But, of course, here comes the knight attacking the rook. And now the rook plays to h5. So the rook has committed. But if one looks at the position, even though white's king's in the corner, not quite the same thing as in the second video. Because after the king moved to the corner, black, of course, wants to go and attack it. But does he have enough squares? The queen and the bishop are still blocked out by this knight. And the rook alone can never come and fight. The knight, the rook, the king, and the queen. Not going to work. In other words, that rook is just misplaced. And at the right moment, white can continue with his attack, where black will have a piece too little to defend. So h3 is played. Knight c8, trying to get rid of that bishop. And now a move that is practically forced, because we don't want to give up our bishop for the knight. But a technique seen in many of Anatoly Karpov's games, who was also a world champion, where you have a bishop, two open squares, and then a knight. We can see the knight cannot move anywhere where it won't be attacked by the bishop. And especially later on in the endgame, you can paralyze a knight with a bishop. And one of the big reasons why a bishop is better than a knight in the late middle game, endgame, because of the knight being restricted. It can't move, and it can't move fast enough. Right? But okay, we don't want to give the bishop away, so the knight moves anyway. King h2, I think maybe later on a rook or a queen will arrive on the back rank, and it won't be check. The king safeguards himself. The king also defends the h-pawn, which now means we can move the knight at the right time. So a necessary move. And also a bit of a waiting move, telling black, okay, what are you going to do? Lots of little things in that little king move. Knight c6. Beg your pardon. Okay. Queen e3 and queen a5. Trying to get in on the a file. Right. knight e1, and immediately black tries and unleashes his bishop. You must be very careful when you play a top-class player. They don't miss moves like this. It looks very tricky. We're attacking a rook. We can't take the bishop because the rook is hanging by the queen, and black must have thought, now I've got the old man. But of course, if you're 60 years old and you played at the top level all your life, they say there's a saying that goes, been there, done it. And knight f3. Now black has to make a move. White has improved his knight. He's still defending his rook with his queen, and black has now to decide. What does he do with that bishop? That's now, quite funnily enough, under attack with the queen and will be taken. So bishop takes knight. Queen takes bishop. If we look at the position now, what's happened here is the white bishop on c5 is better than the black bishop on g7. The white knight, even though it's standing on the side of the board, is better than this knight. This knight is not going anywhere fast. The queen is a bit misplaced compared to white's queen, and the black rooks, even though they are doing something, they are not well coordinated. Black's position, even though the position is dead level in pieces and pawns, is not so easy to play. Right, so he does try. He goes knight e7. Okay, you can tell me, what would you play? We'll give you a few seconds and decide what move will white play in this position to keep the advantage. Funny enough, I think everybody will get this. Right, remembering 2 bishops are better than 2 knights. 2 bishops are better than a knight and a bishop in most occasions. And 1 bishop is sometimes better than 1 knight. But there comes a point in a game where sometimes the advantage has already come, or you're going to shift the advantage from one advantage to another. So do you take the knight? That is the big question. Okay, I've talked enough nonsense. Of course, bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop, and then what is the follow-up move after that? I think we're all screaming there if you're watching the video. Right, like I said, I'm here to tell you a little bit about Boris Spassky and a few ideas that he had. Not too much concerned about all the tactics and those sort of things. You can watch them on any video. People are doing them a dime a dozen, and sometimes it's difficult. You just want to have a nice time. You don't want to break your brain. Sometimes we just want to enjoy a game of chess. So yeah, even your mom's got this one right. Rook c8, check. And black king caught on the back rank has to step out of it. King f7. And now a very nice move. There's no checkmates. There's no direct attacks. White's king is not too healthy himself. So what does Spassky do? He places the queen on d3. Now, for those who play the Scandinavian defense, you often put your queen on d6. The queen attacks a lot of squares from d6, and in this case d3. It's just the mirror image. And of course, once again, the psychological impact. A few moves ago, black had a bishop on a6 on a white square, which was troublesome to white. Black bragged with a bishop move, then it got swapped off, and all of a sudden the queen lands on a white square, and black has to start thinking, should I have done that? Because now I'm being attacked everywhere. And of course, there's a danger point over here, because it's being attacked by knight, rook, and queen. After queen d3, rook c7, rook takes c7, queen takes c7, and here we go. What is the next move for white? Yes, it is knight takes g6. Before we carry on, this king, and Spassky had many of these games where his king was hanging on a thread, but the opponent could not get to it. And it doesn't just happen, right? He made sure that the black queen cannot come in here. Black himself played his rook out of the game. Look at this pawn being defended by the king. So one has to think that Spassky knew what was coming. Black's other piece, the bishop on g7 is poor. It's being blocked. like granite by all these pawns, right? It's biting on granite. Therefore, the sacrifice is on. Knight takes g6, right? And I think I'm going to play it out this way. It didn't end like this, but it ended soon anyway, right? What would happen if we take pawn takes knight, queen takes pawn, and we win the rook? So that's not really on. Black played queen d8, king g3. Right, let's see what would happen. Okay, I think it's a story of... it's interesting. Let's see what happens. King g3. Okay, safeguarding the position. And black has to make a move at some stage. Right, he's now playing for perpetuals with queen a5. And after that move, white plays queen c2. If the queen moves, we are in ourselves and we are going to mate black. So it's not so easy. He had a glimmer of hope, but white just gives him no play. And after queen c2, rook h6. Now we are threatening to take that knight. But the knight has done his job. Remember, if we count the pawns, white was hoping to checkmate. Black was up to the task. He didn't get checkmated, but he lost the pawn. And now we have to switch our minds again that we might have to win the pawn ending, which once again I'll refer you back to Jessie's video where she shows you very nicely how to win with the pawn. Crucial endgame skills. If we are pawn up, you can swap all the pieces off, and if you know that theory, you can go and win your game. And it's very nice to checkmate with the queen right at the end of the game. It doesn't really matter when it comes. So queen b6, and remember, at one point there was a black rook here with two pawns defending it, and you wouldn't have thought that white was going to win on the f5 square, but here we go, f5. White has controlled f5. The game is sort of just about over. Black plays bishop f8, and after f6, there's not much to be done. Queen b8, king g2, getting off that diagonal. Let's just have a look why. There's still a glimmer of hope. If black can take this pawn with his rook, this pawn won't be able to capture back because it's a check. So king g2, nothing to do. Black resigned. He's going to be either checkmated or the f6 pawn will eventually get through. Let's see how this game could end. Let's, for instance, say black covers his 7th rank. Now, we would like to move this pawn. It's our best pawn, but this king is in the way. It's blocking it. So we have to remove the blockade. So we can maybe try something like knight f3. And let's say black goes rook g6. We can capture the rook. And black will capture back. And now we can check. And the king has to move. Let's say, for instance, he goes to try and run away to e8. We can play queen takes g6. And it's all over. The pawn is going to queen. But it's very, very tricky. Because this pawn is also falling. So king d8, knight takes pawn. We've won another pawn, and now we have two passed pawns. And of course, we're going to win the bishop. The game is just lost. That's why black resigned. Just for the ones who don't know, once you have two passed pawns like this, and there's no pawns over here or in the way, those pawns are through. Once they reach side by side, the 6th rank. So if we get this pawn to e6, and the pawn is next to it, they are just as strong, and in most cases stronger than the rook. Remember that, something to remember. So that's 3 Spassky games for you. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you enjoyed the classic Russian music. And yeah, next time I'll have a surprise. A very strong player that's also forgotten. And luckily, I haven't forgotten about him. You will enjoy him. And remember, we played chess in the 70s and the 80s. We were all once young. So we know how the young ones think. I hope you learned something from the video. I hope you enjoyed it. We will look at making it harder in the future and giving more puzzle-like questions and games. This is just for some bit of Spassky magic. The 3 games are not at all the only good ones he played, but maybe some forgotten games. Okay, and I hope all of you can play like this when you're over 60, facing a player that became world champion a few years later. And this was very quick loss for Black, and I'm sure very enjoyable to Boris Spassky. Right, see you next time, and subscribe to the PE Chess Club's channel. Go to the club. It's the best club in the country, according to me, location-wise. It's a spread of all chess players. There are other sporting codes there. We all live in good harmony, except, of course, on the chessboard. And keep practicing. We smile when we win. We don't if we lose. Nobody likes to lose. So if you want to smile more often, you got to win more often. You got to practice more often. Right. Thank you very much.